This summer, Ukraine is co-hosting the European Football Championships, but don't be deceived by the sporting camaraderie. Ukraine's political relationship with the EU is in crisis. The most pressing dispute concerns Yulia Timoshenko, the former Ukrainian Prime Minister, imprisoned for 7 years after a trial dismissed as a political charade by many in the West. My guest today is Yulia Timoshenko's daughter, Євгенія. What does the Tymoshenko story say about Ukraine? Євгенія Tymoshenko, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
You have been thrust into a role that you can never have wanted, campaigning on behalf of your mother. What is it like for you?
You know, actually I've started as my mother's public defender during the court hearing back in August, and since she was illegally arrested on the 5th of August. And, you know, I became a witness, involuntary witness of the process and of such a show trial.
You're in court every day?
I was in the court every day, and actually the court was held on a day-to-day basis with no breaks, with no, you know, possibility for the defense to prepare the strategy. So, you know, I just was able to see the whole, you know, ugly picture behind the so-called, you know, independent judicial system, like President Yanukovych says many times now.
It took a couple of months for the court procedures to unfold. Was your mother very, very surprised to be convicted and then to be sentenced to 7 years?
You know, today, actually 10 years ago today, I was in England. I was studying in England, and both of my parents and my grandfather were in prison for political repressions. And now I can see it, you know, as a déjà vu from these events. And then, like this time, now what's happening now, it's the result of my mother's fight with corruption and. You know, her goal as a politician, you know, to keep going and to keep fighting for democracy in Ukraine. And I guess after Yanukovych won the elections, we can say, you know, with very minor overway, you know, she of course she thought that she would be persecuted as a main political opponent.
So she sort of steeled herself for the likelihood that she was going to be imprisoned.
Well, you know, the questioning and visits to prosecutor office have started since early 2010. Just when the Yanukovych came into power, and it started become evident that she would be, you know, one of the main victims of the political repressions again.
So she's had several months in prison now, and she's been moved from a cell which was in Kiev to I think what they call a prison camp or a penal camp, 300 miles east of Kiev. Quite a tough place to be. There's been a lot of speculation about her health. She's seen, I think, independent doctors from Germany and Canada in the last few days. How is her health right now?
Right now, her health is in bad condition. Her health is getting worse, actually, and it's been so since her arrest. She started having unknown symptoms, you know, on her skin after a couple of weeks into the arrest, and now. Starting from October, and now for 3 months she's been suffering really bad back pain. She cannot walk, and she hasn't had any medical treatment so far.
But the doctor's report, as I understand it, hasn't been fully released, but as I understand it, they point to a hernia problem she has. But the Ukrainian authorities have looked at this report and said, well, here is validation of our treatment of her, because they're not suggesting she's been really mistreated, and they're not even suggesting she needs any sort of special surgery. So are you satisfied now that the treatment she needs, she is getting?
She's not getting any treatment actually at the moment, and we don't know whether she will get any treatment, because it's been very hard battle for us to get independent doctors to see her, and for diplomats and the actually whole world to put pressure enough that the prosecutor office and the authorities in Ukraine allowed them to come in. And after a few days of battling, they managed to see her. But now when they issued their preliminary diagnosis, and now they're preparing their full recommendations and diagnosis, the doctors from the Ministry of Health in Ukraine keep manipulating and falsifying the diagnosis like they've done for all these 3 months.
I understand, of course, why you are campaigning around the world to get your mother out as soon as possible, but you have to accept, I suppose, that, you know, she went through due process in Ukraine. There was a court proceeding which was open to the public. You were there yourself, as were many journalists. She was convicted in a court of law. Under Ukrainian law, she was found guilty of exceeding her authority when she was Prime Minister, particularly in relation to that important gas deal with the Russians in 2009. And she's in prison. I mean, you now call upon the President, Mr. Yanukovych, to release her, but that would be flying in the face of due process, of the Constitution, would it not?
Well, there are many explanations to what's been going on, as you know, and what was important to mention is that EU early in the process commissioned the Danish Helsinki Committee to do a report on the political repressions in Ukraine and find out the truth behind it, and their conclusion was that it is 100% politically motivated case. And now, after Yanukovych's promised reforms with judiciary system, he introduced a so-called High Council of Justice, which consists of Prosecutor General, of the head of the security service. That was recently actually he withdrew his candidacy because it's absurd. How can Prosecutor General and people like this in the high up in the government be in control of the judges via this High Council of Justice? So claiming by the government the judiciary system is independent is a complete lie and misinformation.
I don't believe your mother consistently called the system corrupt and rotten to the core when she was at various times Prime Minister and a leading figure in the Ukrainian political elite.
When she was the Prime Minister, of course, she had very high responsibility, but very limited powers and instruments to implement reforms. And of course, after Yanukovych stole the victory just before the Orange Revolution, which became cause for Orange Revolution and the fight of people to get the true results, she didn't go after him. She didn't abuse the law system in Ukraine, the criminal code, to put him to prison for falsifying the elections, for using corrupt measures to get to the presidency. And she had much more important things to do, and to care for population via social reforms, via economic reforms, and
Well, I want to talk to you more about her relationship with Mr. Yanukovych, the current president, and of course former President Yushchenko as well, in a moment. But let's just stick with one other element of your mum's current predicament, and that is the fact that she now faces the prospect of more charges. Now, these charges go back to the late 90s, when she was the very powerful owner, with your father, co-owner of an energy company that made an awful lot of money. And she now stands accused of embezzlement and fraud, tax fraud, connected with the vast sums of money that she made at that time. Do you recognize that in Ukraine there are some real questions about your mother's economic activities at that time?
I don't, but there are certain problems with these so-called criminal cases, and they're very fundamental problems, because these criminal cases have been closed by the Supreme Court of Ukraine 6 years ago, when my mother was in opposition already. So these criminal cases go back to the 90s, and they don't have any legal basis, because during the time that they accuse her of some economic mishandling, she was not the part of the corporation anymore. She left the corporation in 1996 when she started politics. And
yeah, but you wouldn't deny, would you, that she was a close associate of Pavlo Lazarenko, a former premier of Ukraine, who eventually fled the country under a cloud of allegations, and who ended up in California being convicted of money laundering. I mean, the association was there. She clearly benefited from her links to this man, who many would call a classic Ukrainian oligarch of the time.
there are questions which need answering, aren't there?
He was prime minister then, and she was businesswoman and very successful businesswoman. She started the really huge corporation which paid off because of this activity all the wage arrears after Soviet times, recreated the trade links between ex-Soviet countries after the collapse of Soviet Union. The amount of benefit this corporation brought was immense.
But
It
primarily,
also,
as we said, to your family. I mean, have you and she and your father decided over the last few months maybe that it's time to be very straight with the Ukrainian people about how much money your parents made at that time? Because, you know, I think it's fair to say there's a degree of cynicism in Ukraine about all of the political and business elite, that somehow all of them in one way or another have been involved in corrupt activity over the last 15 years. And if your mother wants to prove that her hands are entirely clean, wouldn't it be good to be transparent about this period of her life?
It's completely transparent, and it was because the amount of time, effort and money has been spent by Kuchma regime, by Yanukovych regime to investigate her corrupt activities, and you see the result. One, the Supreme Court closed all the criminal cases. They couldn't find in the masses of documents concerning the economic activity of the company, no corruption. And this time now, all these charges have no legal basis at all, because they've just been resurrected from something that's been proven by Supreme Court and accepted as having no criminal substance at all.
It seems your mum feels that she is being personally persecuted in a very direct way by President Yanukovych. Is that true?
Of course, if you look at the way that the court went, the actual charges against her, that's been, disproven and seen as absurd charges by democratic world really now, and accepted as such.
Well, let me stop you there, because you've said that several times, that they're absurd and people can see they're absurd. Why is it, if they are so absurd, that there hasn't been a greater public reaction inside Ukraine? Because I know there were hundreds of people, of your mum's supporters outside the courthouse during the trial. There have been a few people who've tried to demonstrate outside the prison. But frankly, we remember the vast hundreds of thousands of people from the Orange Revolution, which your mum co-led with Mr. Yushchenko. Why haven't those kinds of crowds been out in Ukraine demonstrating their support for your mother?
There's a simple question. The simple answer for this is, if my mother was free, the demonstrations would be much bigger, and the protests would probably cover all of Ukraine, given the sense of the protest now people feel towards the incumbent regime.
But couldn't people power help get her out? If people were only prepared, if they really cared enough about your mother's plight, wouldn't they be taking to the streets now?
No, the regime is doing everything to put fear into people, starting from the show trials that you see, not just for my mother, but for tens of other opposition politicians, her ex-colleagues. They've increased the number of police, militia forces by hundreds. They've increased their pay, their ranks. I mean, you can see that, even if a small type of protest happening in Ukraine for about several thousand people, there are twice as many police and militia outside trying to, force people out of the streets.
But it seems to me that maybe one reason why there's some apathy in connection to your mother's current situation is that there's deep disappointment inside Ukraine at what happened to the Orange Revolution. What happened to the relationship, for example, between your mother and former President Yushchenko, the co-leaders of the Orange Revolution, who then had the opportunity to govern together with him as president, your mum as prime minister, and it failed miserably. And they fell out, they engaged in a vendetta, a fight between the two of them, and we saw in the end former President Yushchenko testify in the court effectively against your mother, saying that the gas deal that your mum had struck with the Russians was at an unjustifiably high price. He said only political motives could have played a role here. National interests were traded for political considerations. An incredibly damning indictment of your own mother.
I can say, only a few things that I can answer this question by now, giving you the result of the polls, the national polls that are going now in Ukraine, that Yushchenko's popularity is about 0.6%. My mother's is that 3% over that of Yanukovych's, and it's still growing. And Yanukovych's popularity is plummeting even faster than it was Yushchenko when he was the president. But talking about their relationship, I'm not a politician. I wasn't there during all this, process and this time. But I saw that my mother did everything she could with the instruments she had at that time, to agree to negotiate this very difficult contract during the European crisis with Russia, to make agreements with IMF, to get through very, very hard at that time, at the economic crisis, social reforms to support people, who are poor, the single mothers, the pensioners, the disabled people. I mean, there were massive reforms that she's done.
Sure, but what people remember, frankly, are the fights between your mother and Yushchenko. I mean, you talk to her now, you have contact with her.
She wasn't the initiator of this fight.
But just sum up for me, how does your mother feel about Yushchenko now?
I think, during the trial, when I was present there, when he gave this, very humiliating, horrible, and lying witnesses during the court case, by trying to devalue the whole, struggle of Orange Revolution, the whole idea and the results of Orange Revolution, she just kept silent. Although she could ask him many questions to kind of counter his arguments, she just kept silent because, she didn't want to completely ruin this idea that that people fought for, and she fought for so much during the time. And I remember, for example, when she pushed for very transparent, really important privatizations in Ukraine, Yushchenko just with signing just a decree with one, signature, cancelled all of these things, all those good things that could have been done.
It should just be said that your characterization of what Mr. Yushchenko said in court, of course, isn't shared by him, his supporters, and
but it's shared by millions of Ukrainians, who were throwing eggs at him when he came out of the courtroom.
That's something which may or may not be subject to future legal action in Ukraine, but certainly we need to be clear that it's very much your own opinion. But let's, in a way, change the focus here, because it seems to me a lot of the campaigning work you're doing right now isn't so much inside Ukraine and aimed at talking to Ukrainian people and getting them out on the streets in support of your mother. It's very much aimed at Western powers. You spend a lot of time in European capitals, a lot of time in the United States, trying to rally support in the West. Is that because it's easier for you, in a way, to deal with the West?
When you sit in the courtroom and you hear the judges just rejecting everything what defense says, which is true. Finding in the material cases some stupid mistakes, like there were materials collected on the 31st of April or in the future date, which never exists, we're traveling in the future. And there are so many breaches of human rights. You see, there are so many breaches of law, of constitution. But what I'm
getting at is that your anger and your passion to right what you perceive to be a wrong seems to involve you spending an awful lot of time outside your country in the West.
Because when you sit there and you realize, when I go to see and visit my mother and I'm not allowed to see her, although I have a full right to see her, when I see that she can be dying in prison and not getting any medical treatment for months for her pain, that she's tortured there with the 24-hour video surveillance and light, know that there's nobody in Ukraine who can solve this, who can help. And because the president, the top person in Ukraine, chose to lead this kind of repressions, which has been condemned by the whole world many, many times for many, many months, but nothing can be done.
So you want the United States, and you want the European Union in particular, to what? Send a message via sanctions, or what do you want? We've already seen the European Union freeze the trade and political agreement that they were going to sign with Ukraine, but how much further do you want them to go?
I'm here and talking about what's happening in Ukraine, the crisis, the democratic crisis that's going on, and talking on behalf of a million people who feel the same as I feel now. And it's just what's happening to my mother is just the pinnacle of this whole crisis, this horrible breaches of every human rights, no rule of law in Ukraine. And when I talk about
with
this,
respect, all of the studies of Ukraine done by independent experts, Transparency International, they don't suggest that the situation was so much very better when your mum was prime minister over the last 6-7 years. There has been constant advice to Ukraine that it needs to improve its political freedoms, its media freedoms, its right to dissent.
Nevertheless, according to Freedom House, we were already a free country. Now we came down to be partially free country.
But my question...
Plus, during the mom's incumbency, we became a part of the WTO. We started negotiations into association agreement and free trade agreement with Europe, which
exactly.
now been undermined completely by the government.
Well, it's interesting that your mother, from prison, sent a message saying that she did not want that political and free trade agreement with the European Union to be blocked because of her situation. She pleaded, actually,
yes.
for both sides to go ahead and sign the agreement, quote unquote, for the good of the country.
Definitely, and she believes that strongly. And now that in spite of the pain, in spite that she has to lie down and be always in bed in pain and under this telescopic camera, write letters to her family and to the articles to the public about what's going on. She's opposing what's going on inside Ukraine, but she doesn't want Ukraine to see the sanctions applied against the whole of the nation, the whole of the people. I mean, at least half of voting population voted for her during elections, so why should they suffer for the actions of government that is completely going in the wrong direction from leading Ukraine to the European future?
Right, so I'm a little bit puzzled. So your message to the leaders in Europe when you go see them, as you have done several times in the last few months, is that you actually want them to block this important trade and political agreement, or you actually want it to be signed?
Of course, it's not for us to decide or to plead for anything.
No, but your voice is important right now.
We don't want, in any case, for any type of sanctions or for this important historical association agreement, this historical chance for Ukraine to be stopped. It's only been done by the government of Yanukovych, who undermined this whole story. All I'm asking is, all we are asking, understanding the mentality of the people in power now and how they use and abuse the law, use the system, use their position to enrich themselves at the moment, using the now coming Euro 2012 competitions. Transparency International said that the corruption levels have reached critical levels now in Ukraine.
We're nearly out of time.
With this.
Before we finish, I just want to know, it's a critical year, not just because of the Euro Championships, Ukraine being on display to Europe and the world, but also because there are parliamentary elections later in the year. You have been so outspoken in recent months. Are you going to continue to campaign through the election period? And could you yourself take up the political mantle that your mother's had for so long?
I never want to be a politician, and I'm not planning to run any political campaign because.
But it seems like in a way you have to now. You are becoming political of necessity.
I think it's mostly provocation done by the regime's media in Ukraine, saying that I'm running for political, or by doing this I pursue some kind of political goal, which is completely untrue, and it's just done to devalue my efforts to do anything helpful for my mother and for political prisoners in Ukraine. That's only my mission, is to help to spread the message and to help these people back in Ukraine.
Do you believe you'll get her out this year?
I believe so.
Well, we hope so, and if indeed she gets out, we'd like to have her on Hard Talk. But for now, thank you, Eugenia Tимошенко, for being on the program.